It even became a good trip, and it was even almost fun at the border at Laredo to have to unpack all the incredible heap on the roof, including Norman's bicycle, and show it to guards and steel-rimmed spectacles who saw they had no chance to check everything in such a hopeless clutter of junk. The wind was whipping keen in the Rio Grande Valley. I felt great. We were in Texas again. You could smell it. The first thing I ordered was ice cream softies for all of us. Nobody objecting at all. And we rolled to San Antonio in the night. It was Thanksgiving Day. Sad signs announced turkey dinner in the cafes of San Antone. We didn't dare stop for that. The American road restless runners are terrified of relaxing even a minute. But outside San Antonio at 10 p.m., Norman was too exhausted to go on and stop the car near a dry river bottom to nap in the front seat while Irwin and I and Laz and Simon took out our sleeping bags and spread them on the 20-degree frosty ground. Tony slept in the back seat. Irwin and Simon slithered somehow into Irwin's new Mexican-bought blue French sleeping bag with the hood, a slim bag and not even long enough for their feet. Lazarus was to get into my army sleeping bag with me. I let him get in first and then slithered in where I could work the zipper over my neck. There was no way of turning over without a signal. The stars were cold and dry, sagebrush with frost, the smell of cold winter cow dung. But that air, that divine plains air, I actually fell asleep on it, and in the middle of our sleep, I made a motion to turn over, and Laz went right over. It was strange. It was also uncomfortable because you couldn't move at all except to turn over en masse. But we were doing all right, and it was Norman and Tony who couldn't stand the cold in the car who woke us all up at 3 a.m. to resume with the heater on the run. Motley dawn in Fredericksburg or someplace which I'd crossed 1,000 times like. Those long, droning runs across the state's afternoon with some of us sleeping, some of us talking, some of us eating sandwiches of despair. Whenever I ride like that, I always wake up from a nap with the sensation that I'm being driven to heaven by the heavenly driver, no matter who he is. There's something strange about one person guiding the car while all the others dream with their lives in his steady hand. Something noble, something old in mankind, some old trust in the good old man. You come out of a drowsy dream of sheets on a roof, and there you are in the Arkansas piney barrens, zipping along at 60, wondering why and looking at the driver who was stern, who was still, who was lonesome at the controls. We arrived at Memphis in the evening and ate a good meal at last in a restaurant. It was then Irwin got mad at Norman, and I was afraid Norman would stop the car and fight him in the road. Some argument about Norman being a pest all the way, which was really no longer true. So I said, Irwin, you can't talk to him like that. He has a right to get sore. So I established in the car that I was a big bumbling bullshitter who didn't want fights for any reason whatever. But Irwin wasn't mad at me either, and Norman became silent on the subject. The only time I ever really fought a man was when he was socking my doubled-up buddy, Steve Wodkowski, against the car at night. Beaten, but kept beating him. A big guy. I rushed in and engaged him across the road with rights and lefts, some of which connected, but all light, like taps or slaps to his back, where his father dragged me off in dismay. I can't defend myself, only friends. So I didn't want Irwin to fight Norman. Once I got mad at Irwin, 1953, and said I'd kick him in the pants, but he said, I can beat you up with my mystic strength, which scared me. Anyway, Irwin doesn't take any bull from anybody, while me, I'm always sitting there with my Buddhist vow of kindness, vowed alone in the woods, taking abuse with pent-up resentment that never comes out. But a man, hearing the Buddha, my hero, my other hero, Christ is first, never answered abuse, came up to the sighing Bhagavat and spit in his face. Buddha is reported to have said, since I can't use your abuse, you may have it back. In Memphis, Simon and Laz, the brothers, suddenly engaged in horseplay at the gas station sidewalk. Annoyed, Lazarus gave Simon one push and sent him skittering halfway across the street, strong as an ox. Laz is 6 feet tall and wiry, but as I say, walks bent over like an old 1910 hipster. Rather like a farmer in the city. The word beat comes from the old southern countryside. In West Virginia at dawn, Norman suddenly made me drive. You can do it. Don't worry. Just drive. I'll relax. And it was that morning I really learned how to drive. With one hand on the bottom of the steering wheel, I somehow managed perfectly all kinds of curves, right and left, with going-to-work cars squeezing in on a narrow two-lane. For the right curve, the right hand. For the left. I was amazed. Everybody in the back seat was asleep. Norman talked to Tony. I felt so proud of myself that I bought a quart of port wine in Wheeling that evening. That was the night of nights on the trip. We all got high and sang a million simultaneous arias as Simon drove grimly, Simon, the old ambulance driver, clear to Washington, D.C. at dawn. over a superhighway through the woods. When we rolled into town, Irwin yelled and shook Lazarus to wake up to see the nation's capital. I want to sleep. No, wake up. You'll never see Washington again, probably. Look, the White House, that big white dome with the light. Washington's monument, that big needle in the sky. Old Mint, said I as we rolled by it. This is where the President of the U.S. lives and does all his thinking about what America's going to do next. Wake up, sit like this. Look, big Justice Departments where they rule on censorship. Lazarus looked out, nodding. Big, empty Negroes standing by mailboxes, I said. Where's the Empire State Building, says Laz. He thinks Washington is in New York. In fact, he probably thinks Mexico is a circle around. Then we go barreling to the New Jersey Turnpike in the eye-dry morning of transcontinental automobile horror, which is the history of America from pioneer wagon to Ford. In Washington, Irwin has called the poetry consultant of the Library of Congress to ask about Raphael, who hasn't arrived yet, waking up the man's woman at dawn, but poetry is poetry. And as we drive the turnpike, Norman and Tony up front with Laz are both earnestly advising him about how to live now, how not to goof, how to get a hold of himself good. As for going in the Army, Laz says, I don't want to be told what to do. But Norman insists we all have to be told what to do. But I disagree because I'm just like Lazarus about the Army or the Navy, too. If I can get away with it, if he can, by diving into the night of the self and becoming obsessed with one's own solo guardian angel. Meanwhile, Irwin and Simon are now completely and finally exhausted and sit erect in the back seat with me, all's well, toot. But with their heads fallen down, sweaty and suffering on their breasts, the mere sight of them, of their weariness slicked, unshaven, sweaty countenances with lips poofed in horror. It makes me realize it was somehow worth it to leave the peace of my Mexican moon roof to go youngling and travailing across harsh folly world with them to some silly but divine destination in some other part of the Holy Ghost. Though I disagree with their ideas about poetry and peace. I can't help loving their suffering, sweaty faces and disheveled heads of hair, like my father's hair when I found him dead in the chair of our home, when I was absolutely incapable of believing there was such a thing as the death of Papa, let alone mine own. Two crazy boys exhausted years later, heads down like my dead father, with whom I'd hotly argued also. Oh, why? Or why not? When angels gotta yell about something. Poor Irwin and Simon in the world together, compañeros of a Spain of their own, bleak parking lots in their brows, their noses broken with greasy, restless philosophers with no bones, saints and angels of a high assembly, from the past in that post I held as babe of heaven, falling with me and Lucifer and Norman too, falling in the car. What will be the death of Irwin? My cat's death is a claw in the earth. Irwin a tooth bone? Simon a brow? Grinning skulls and all the car? Lazarus has to join the army for this? The mothers of all these men pining away in shaded living rooms now? The fathers horny-handed, buried with shovels on their breasts? Or printer's ink fingers curled over rosary tomb? And their ancestors? The aria singers gulping earth? Now, the Puerto Rican with his cane reed where herons hay graves. Soft dawn wind off Carib doth rustle Camacho's oil flutter. The deep French faces of Canada staring forever in the ground. The singers of dawn Mexico hung up on corazon, heart. No more ope the high barred window serenade handkerchief girl lips. No. Yes.